Sometimes a single act of kindness can echo through an entire town. On the edge of Pine Creek, where the autumn wind whispers secrets through golden leaves, a battered German shepherd stands shivering on a weathered auction block, eyes wary scars glinting in the morning light. Most turn away. But one quiet boy, heart full of longing and courage, steps from the crowd. He reaches out, not knowing that his small gesture will ignite a journey of healing courage and hope that no one in Pine Creek will ever forget. Before we begin Chapter 1, let us know in the comments. Have you ever rescued an animal or wished you had? Share your thoughts. Below your story might inspire someone else's act of kindness. A golden morning dawned over Pine Creek, Colorado, as the midsummer sun cast gentle warmth across the sleepy town. The streets of Pine Creek, lined with old brick buildings, a faded red and white diner, and a hardware store that hadn't changed its sign in decades, stirred to life with the promise of the annual summer auction. Above the sky stretched blue and cloudless, the air carrying the scent of distant pines and the faint echo of laughter from children let loose on their summer holidays. The Pine Creek Animal Shelter, tucked behind rows of wildflowers at the edge of town, was especially busy that day. Among the bustling volunteers and eager families, a single cage sat apart from the others. Inside Shadow, a German shepherd of about 6 years, lay curled on his mat. His fur, once a proud black and tan, was now streaked with gray and dust. Thin but not starving Shadow bore scars across his haunches, and along one ear a road map of battles survived. His amber eyes, clouded at the edges, held a weary wisdom, and he shrank back at sudden noises or the approach of strangers. No one could miss the heaviness that clung to him as if the world's weight pressed down on his broad, noble shoulders. He had the solid build of a dog born to work, yet every movement spoke of exhaustion and vigilance. The tag on his collar read, "Only Shadow Retired Service K9." Watching over the preparations was Will Parker, a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered and weathered by sun and wind. With a graying beard and a deep-set gaze, Will had spent years as a mountain rescue worker before an accident left him limping and unable to continue. Now he managed the animal shelter, walking with a quiet authority and a gentle patience that drew out the trust of even the most frightened animals. He wore faded jeans, sturdy boots, and a battered baseball cap, and carried the air of someone who had made peace with both sorrow and solitude. On the other side of town, in a neat little house shaded by an ancient oak, 10-year-old Ethan Miller finished tying his shoelaces with trembling fingers. Ethan was small for his age, pale and wiry, with a mop of brown hair that always seemed one step away from disorder. His eyes, wide and curious, carried a depth of sadness that most children his age had never known. Ethan's mother, Maggie Miller, was a single mom in her early 30s. Tall, slender, and always moving with the brisk efficiency of someone balancing too many roles, she was the head nurse at the local clinic. Years of raising Ethan alone since her husband's death had made Maggie both fiercely protective and gently weary. She cared for her son with a steady love, but like many in Pine Creek, had little time for the softer edges of life. Ethan, shy and quiet, found solace in books and his sketchbook. School was a gauntlet for him. He was often picked last for games. His stammer drew laughter from classmates, and he longed for a friend who might truly understand. The news of the auction had sparked a small hope in Ethan's heart. He had saved every penny he could, birthday dollars, found change, and even a couple of crumpled bills from mowing old Mrs. Ramsey's yard, hidden in a worn coffee can beneath his bed. The Pine Creek Animal Shelter bustled with life that morning. Parents held toddlers aloft to peek into crates, teenagers giggled over fluffy puppies, and older couples strolled slowly, weighing the decision to welcome a new companion into their twilight years. Will Parker moved among them, answering questions and telling stories, all the while keeping a watchful eye on Shadow, whose cage remained untouched by curious hands. As the auction began, the mood was festive. Dogs barked, children cheered, and the auctioneer's voice rang out over the crowd. One by one, the friendliest puppies found new homes, and young dogs were led away by beaming families. When Shadow's turn finally came, Will cleared his throat, his voice measured and kind. Up next is Shadow, a retired service dog. He's had a hard road, but he deserves a second chance. But the crowd, which had been lively moments before, fell strangely silent. A heavy-set man with a loud laugh muttered, "Looks like trouble," earning a few nervous chuckles. An elderly woman clucked her tongue and shook her head. Even the children who had begged for every puppy so far pulled away from Shadow's pen. Shadow stood and faced the crowd, posture stiff tail low, as if bracing for another disappointment. His gaze passed over dozens of faces and landed finally on Ethan. Ethan, who had hung back all morning, was transfixed. He saw not a broken dog, but a creature who understood what it meant to be overlooked, to carry silent wounds. In Shadow's wary eyes, Ethan recognized the loneliness that gnawed at him each day. Heart-pounding, he took a hesitant step forward. Maggie, busy on her phone, barely noticed as Ethan approached the pen. Will noticed, however. He watched the boy with cautious hope. "Would you like to meet him?" Will asked gently. Ethan nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose, and Will opened the pen door. Shadow shrank back at first, but Ethan crouched low, speaking softly. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." There was no magic moment, no instant trust, just two souls, both cautious, sharing a silent understanding. Maggie looked up and frowned. "Calling Ethan, we can't afford a dog right now." But Ethan turned, eyes shining, and said, "He needs me, Mom. I think I need him too." Something in his voice, a quiet certainty so rare for her anxious son, made Maggie pause. The auctioneer's voice boomed. "Opening bid, $50 for Shadow." No hands went up. Silence hung awkward and heavy. Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out his coffee can. He stepped up, cheeks flushed, and declared, "I have $34.27. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, but Will's face softened. "Well, son, that's not much for a dog like him, but sometimes the right home is worth more than money," Will said. The auctioneer shrugged, glanced at the crowd, and seeing no other bids, announced, "Sold to the young man with the big heart." Ethan grinned, and for a moment Shadow lifted his head and inched closer, drawn by the boy's gentle presence. Maggie relented, sensing this was a moment her son needed more than anything, a chance to save something, and perhaps be saved in return. As the morning faded to afternoon, Ethan signed the paperwork with a trembling hand. Will handed over Shadow's leash, kneeling to Ethan's level. "He's been through a lot. Be patient with him and he'll surprise you," Will advised. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over his small shoulders, but also a strange, buoyant hope. Shadow followed Ethan out into the sunlit yard, keeping close but cautious. The crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads, others whispering about the odd pair, but Ethan didn't care. Maggie trailed behind, quietly watching her son and the battered dog. As they crossed the lot, Shadow glanced up at Ethan. A brief, uncertain flicker of trust, and for the first time Ethan felt seen. In the distance, the pines swayed, and a breeze carried the sense of earth and promise. Pine Creek's summer auction had ended, but for Ethan and Shadow, a new chapter, one stitched together by pain, and the possibility of healing, was just beginning. Pine Creek was bathed in the warm gold of a late summer afternoon when Ethan, his mother Maggie, and Shadow arrived home. Their modest house sat under the sprawling limbs of an ancient oak, its paint a gentle blue, peeling at the corners, front porch, crowded with potted marigolds, and a faded wind chime that sang quietly in the breeze. It was the kind of house that felt safe, at least on the outside, a sharp contrast to the anxious air inside as Shadow stepped hesitantly over the threshold for the first time. Maggie, tall and slim, her dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, watched with wary eyes. Her features, usually softened by a gentle smile for patients at the clinic, were tight with uncertainty. She'd spent years shielding Ethan from disappointments and heartbreak, and now she found herself questioning if she was letting a new kind of risk into their fragile peace. Her blue scrub still bore a faint scent of antiseptic and lavender, evidence of a long shift that morning. As she closed the door behind them, Shadow immediately flattened himself against the hallway wall. Ears pinned back, tail tucked. Ethan knelt a few feet away, speaking in the same gentle tone he had used at the shelter. "It's okay, Shadow. This is your home now." the dog's body trembled, eyes flickering between Ethan and Maggie as if searching for an escape. Every creak of the floorboards made Shadow wince, and the sudden thump of a car door outside sent him scurrying beneath the dining table. Ethan's heart twisted with worry. He had dreamed of joyful homecomings, not this silent, nervous dance. Later that evening, Maggie prepared dinner, a simple stew of carrots and chicken. The house filled with warmth, but Shadow remained hunched under the table paws splayed and gaze fixed on the door. When Maggie set a bowl of food a careful distance away, Shadow's hunger eventually won out, but he ate in a crouch, ready to flee at any moment. Ethan sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor nearby, scribbling in his notebook. Day 1, Shadow is scared. He only comes out if it's quiet. I think he wants to trust me, but he doesn't know how. That night, as Ethan settled into bed, Shadow lay curled in the hallway, body tight as a spring. The old house made its usual chorus of pops and sighs as it cooled each one, causing Shadow's ears to flick and his body to tense. Sleep came slowly to them both. The next morning brought the reality of new routines. Maggie prepared to leave for her shift at the clinic, donning her navy scrubs and slipping her ID badge around her neck. She paused at the door, glancing between Ethan, still in his pajamas, hair wild from sleep, and Shadow, who paced nervously in the hallway. I have to go, sweetheart. Don't let Shadow outside alone yet, okay? Her voice was gentle, but carried the edge of worry. As soon as Maggie left, the house seemed too large and too quiet. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before him, but his mind was on Shadow. He moved slowly, talking about his day, describing his favorite superheroes, drawing pictures on scraps of paper and holding them out with shy hopefulness. For hours, Shadow kept his distance, flinching at dropped pencils or the shrill ring of the phone. Mid-morning, the doorbell chimed. Ethan peeked out and saw Will Parker, his sturdy frame framed by the sunlight, a battered duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Will smiled, lines crinkling at the corners of his brown eyes. Thought I'd stop by and see how the old soldier's settling in. He knelt down, letting Shadow sniff his outstretched hand. Will's presence seemed to calm the dog a little, and he offered advice in a low voice. Sometimes these service dogs are waiting for orders. They don't know how to be pets yet. Let's try a few things. Will's lessons were simple but patient. He taught Ethan to let Shadow come to him instead of reaching out, and how to use soft whistles and gentle words as cues. He showed Ethan a game with an old tennis ball, rolling it gently across the floor and letting Shadow decide if he wanted to join. The first time Shadow nudged the ball back, Ethan's eyes went wide with hope. Will also watched Maggie, who hovered in the doorway when she returned home, uncertain. You're doing fine, Will said quietly. He's just lost right now, but he'll find his place. Maggie nodded, though her smile was tight. She was used to solving problems quickly at the clinic. She set bone-stitched wounds, calmed parents, but this was different. Healing Shadow, she realized, would take time she wasn't sure she had. At dinner, Shadow ventured a few steps closer, drawn by the smell of Maggie's homemade meatloaf. For the first time, Ethan was able to feed him a treat from his hand, though Shadow's tongue darted out and snatched it with lightning speed before retreating. Maggie watched from the sink, the corners of her mouth lifting as she witnessed this small victory. That night, Ethan decided to camp out in the hallway, making a nest of blankets beside Shadow. He read quietly from a comic book voice, soft and soothing. Shadow didn't cuddle close, but he rested his head near Ethan's feet, breathing deep and even at last. For a moment, the house felt more whole, the distance between past pain and present hope narrowing ever so slightly. The week that followed brought both progress and setbacks. On the third day, a thunderstorm rolled through Pine Creek. Shadow, terrified by the crashes of thunder, tried to wedge himself behind the dryer, barking hoarsely. Ethan, frightened but determined, sat nearby until the storm passed, whispering words of comfort. When Maggie arrived home, soaked and weary from her shift, she found them huddled together in the laundry room, a portrait of stubborn hope. There were setbacks, shoes chewed in the night carpets, soiled by nerves, and more than one tense conversation between mother and son about responsibility. But there were also moments of wonder. The day Shadow let Ethan brush his fur, the afternoon he followed Ethan into the backyard, to lie in the sun, the shy wag of his tail at Maggie's gentle laugh. As the chapter closed, the Miller home was changed, not yet peaceful, but marked by the slow, persistent work of healing. In her journal that night, Maggie wrote, "Shadow is teaching us patience. Maybe that's what we needed all along." Ethan fell asleep on his bed with a tired smile, Shadow curled up on the rug nearby, both of them braver than they had been a week before. The last of the summer warmth lingered in Pine Creek, painting the hillsides with dappled sunlight as Ethan, Shadow, and Maggie settled into their new rhythm. The little blue house, which once seemed too quiet, now pulsed with life, sometimes laughter, sometimes the startled barks of Shadow, and sometimes the soft hush of comfort after a stormy night. Each day, Ethan grew more determined to reach the gentle soul hidden behind Shadow's anxious eyes. One crisp Saturday morning, Maggie suggested a family walk along the river trail. Dressed in her old hiking boots and a red flannel shirt, Maggie's tall figure cut a striking silhouette against the golden fields. Her hair, usually pulled back for work, tumbled loose around her shoulders. She looked younger and more at ease away from the clinic, though shadows of fatigue still clung to her face, remnants of late shifts and years of single motherhood. Ethan donned his favorite blue jacket, its sleeves a little too short after a summer growth spurt, and Shadow wore his sturdy black collar tags, clinking quietly with each hesitant step. As they walked, Shadow kept close to Ethan, always glancing back at Maggie. With each breeze rustling the trees, his ears flicked nervously. The trio passed by Mrs. Ramsey, their neighbor, a round, cheerful woman in her late 60s, her cheeks rosy from the morning air. Mrs. Ramsey waved her gloved hand smudged with dirt from her garden. "Out enjoying the sun, I see Shadows looking stronger every day," she called. Her tone was warm, her smile genuine, but even she gave the dog a respectful distance, well aware of his unpredictable nerves. The river trail sparkled in the sunlight. Ethan pointed out skipping stones and ducklings trying to distract Shadow from the unfamiliar world. Just as their steps found an easy pace, the distant sound of a helicopter thrummed through the air, steady at first, then growing louder, echoing across the water. Shadow stopped dead, his entire body stiffening. His eyes widened, and in an instant he dropped low. Belly pressed to the ground, tail curled tight. His breath quickened to a whine that became a growl as the helicopter passed overhead. Ethan knelt beside him, alarmed. "It's okay, Shadow. It's just a helicopter." But Shadow was beyond comfort. He scrambled away from the trail, dragging the leash nails, tearing up the grass. Ethan struggled to hold on, heart pounding. Maggie hurried to help, kneeling beside her son, speaking softly to the panicked dog. Her calm voice, steady, practiced, finally broke through. "Shadow, you're safe. You're home. No one will hurt you." Gradually, as the helicopter faded, Shadow's trembling slowed. But he refused to stand. Only when Ethan pressed his forehead gently against Shadow's did the dog finally rise, shaking all over. They made their way home in silence. Ethan, still shaken, led Shadow to his bed by the window. Maggie sat beside them, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Her brow furrowed in concern. "I think he's remembering something bad," Ethan said quietly. Maggie nodded her nurse's intuition, telling her this was more than ordinary fear. That afternoon, Will Parker arrived to drop off a box of old dog toys and books. He found Maggie in the kitchen, worry lines deepening around her eyes. Will, his presence always solid and calming, set the box on the table and leaned against the counter. "Tough walk?" he asked, noticing the tension in the room. Maggie recounted the morning's incident, voice barely above a whisper. Will listened intently, hands folded. "It's not uncommon," he finally said. "Some of these dogs, especially the ones who served, they've seen more than any animal should. Helicopters, loud noises, even certain smells can bring it all back." His voice grew softer, more personal. "When I was in rescue, we had a canine named Rex. He'd flinch at every radio call, couldn't sleep through storms. It's like they carry their battles home with them." Ethan listened wide-eyed. "Why do people leave dogs like Shadow behind?" he asked. Will sighed, running a hand through his graying beard. "Sometimes it's easier for people to forget the hard things. Not everyone sees these dogs as heroes after their work is done. They get left at shelters like old tools put away and forgotten. But they're not broken, they're just waiting for someone who'll understand them. Maggie wiped a tear from her cheek, moved by the story. She squeezed Ethan's shoulder and offered Shadow a piece of leftover chicken, which the dog accepted, his tail giving a hesitant wag. Will noticed this and smiled. He's coming around, you know, slowly. That night, Ethan opened a new notebook, writing in careful block letters, Shadow's story, our journey. He recorded the events of the day, his fears for Shadow, and his hopes that one day Shadow would play fetch in the backyard, without flinching at every sound. He decorated the first page with a shaky drawing of a boy and his dog beneath a wide Colorado sky. Over the next week, Ethan and Shadow took shorter walks, avoiding busy streets and sudden noises. Ethan read to Shadow every night, sometimes comics, sometimes stories about brave dogs and loyal friends. Maggie, now more patient, spent her evenings searching for advice online, reaching out to a local animal behaviorist named Dr. Helen Fisher, a petite woman in her early 40s, known for her practical, no-nonsense approach to animal trauma. Dr. Fisher, with her cropped blonde hair and sharp green eyes, scheduled a visit for the following week, promising to bring some calming aids and techniques. Ethan's journal became a daily ritual, each entry tracking progress. Shadow sniffed another dog at the park today. He didn't bark when the mailman came. He let me brush his tail for a whole minute. Sometimes the setbacks were hard, like the night a thunderstorm sent Shadow hiding under the bed, or the day a passing truck backfired, and he refused to go outside for hours. But Ethan and Maggie learned to mark every small victory. By the end of the week, something shifted. One sunny morning, Ethan found Shadow sitting at the door tail, wagging leash in his mouth, an invitation. Maggie watched from the kitchen window as Ethan and Shadow ventured out side by side into the gentle new day. For the first time, hope outweighed fear. Gray clouds gathered over Pine Creek by mid-afternoon, swallowing the blue sky and painting the little town in uneasy shadow. The air was thick electric, one of those rare Colorado days when nature felt wild and unpredictable. The wind whipped through the streets, making the oak outside Ethan's house groan and sway. Maggie stood at the window, her face drawn with worry. She wore a navy raincoat, her hair tightly braided against the coming storm, and her gaze kept flicking between the swirling sky and the empty sidewalk. Ethan, now more confident in his routine, had insisted on walking home from school with friends, but the threat of the storm pressed at Maggie's nerves. Shadow paced restlessly from window to door, ears pinned back, tail rigid. Thunder rolled, rattling the windows. The German Shepherd's body, though lean and muscular, quivered with old anxieties. His past life as a working dog left him with scars deeper than what met the eye. Yet after weeks in the Miller home, something new had started to bloom in Shadow. A sense of belonging, a thread of trust, spun between him and the boy who refused to give up on him. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Mrs. Ramsey, their cheerful neighbor, hurried up the path with an umbrella, calling out that her phone lines were down and asking Maggie to check her weather app. Maggie, tall and still in her scrubs, invited Mrs. Ramsey in for coffee, but her eyes kept straying to the clock. Mrs. Ramsey, round-faced and forever smelling faintly of cinnamon, tried to reassure her. "Don't worry, dear, Ethan's a smart one." But Maggie could barely muster a smile. Rain hammered harder. Wind howled. When the town's emergency siren wailed, a long, eerie sound echoing down Main Street, Maggie's worry turned to fear. Ethan, meanwhile, was making his way down Pine Street, jacket pulled tight against the driving rain. His two friends, brothers Max and Tyler, had already sprinted home, leaving Ethan to navigate the last half-mile alone. He pressed on, head down, as the thunder boomed. At the crossing near the swollen creek, the water was already licking the edge of the road. Lightning forked overhead. In that moment, a sudden flash and a crash of thunder made Ethan stumble. The creek, wild with runoff, had turned into a churning brown torrent, the wooden footbridge now barely visible beneath waves. Back at home, Shadow's agitation built to a fever pitch. Another crack of thunder, and he began to bark, short, urgent bursts that echoed through the house. Maggie tried to calm him, but Shadow pawed at the door, pacing and whining, then let out a howl that Maggie had never heard before. Instinct warred with fear in the dog's mind. Then, just as another bolt split the sky, Shadow lunged at the door and pawed the handle, eyes fixed on the storm. Something told Maggie to trust him. Grabbing her raincoat, Maggie turned to Mrs. Ramsey. "Stay here in case Ethan comes home," she said, voice trembling. She fumbled for her phone and called Will Parker. "Ethan's not home. I think he's caught in the storm. Shadow's acting like he knows." Will's response was immediate. "Stay calm. I'll be there in 5 minutes. We'll search together." Will, who always seemed unshakable, was already pulling on his old rescue gear as he spoke, reflective vest-battered yellow hat, flashlight strapped to his belt. The storm reached its peak as Maggie and Shadow plunged into the street, Will joining them a block later. Rain pelted down in sheets, and water ran in rivers along the gutters. Shadow tugged at the leash nose, working furiously, his entire body tensed for action. He hesitated at every intersection, searching for Ethan's scent, finally pulling them towards the edge of town, where the creek had become a raging, muddy snake. At the creek, a small crowd had gathered, townsfolk drawn by the siren and the fear that someone might be in danger. Sheriff Carson, a tall, solid man in his 50s, calm even when chaos reigned, stood directing volunteers. He wore a waterproof jacket with the badge pinned over his heart, his gray mustache bristling as he barked orders. "We think someone's been swept downstream," a woman called. Maggie's heart nearly stopped. Shadow, now free from the leash, plunged down the embankment, ignoring the cold and the roar of water. His chest deep in the rushing creek, he barked once, sharp and clear. Ethan, clinging to a half-submerged log, heard his dog's call and managed a weak reply. The sight of Shadow gave Ethan the strength to hold on a little longer. Will, flashlight sweeping the bank, spotted Ethan's blue jacket caught on the branches. Without a word, he waded into the current, bracing himself as Shadow reached Ethan first. The dog seized the boy's jacket gently in his teeth, helping to steady him as Will pulled both to safety with the help of Sheriff Carson and another volunteer. Maggie, shaking with relief, wrapped Ethan in her arms, tears lost in the rain. The townspeople gathered round, stunned and moved by the sight of the battered dog who had braved the storm to save his boy. Mrs. Ramsey, holding her umbrella over Ethan, declared, "That dog's a hero." Even Sheriff Carson knelt, his usual stern face softening as he scratched Shadow behind the ears. "You've earned your place in Pine Creek, old boy." As the storm passed and the rain eased, the group headed home. Will walked beside Maggie, sharing the story of how he'd once been saved by a search dog during a blizzard years ago, and how that moment changed his life. Maggie listened, tears and laughter mixing in her voice as she shared the fear of losing Ethan and the hope she found in Shadow's courage. The shared ordeal drew Maggie and Will closer, the walls they'd both built over the years, crumbling a little in the aftermath of crisis. That night, Ethan curled up on the couch with Shadow's head in his lap, the dog's breathing slow and peaceful. Maggie sat beside them, Will on the armchair, sharing cocoa and quiet gratitude. Outside, the creek still rushed, but inside, the Miller home was finally warm and safe. For the first time, Ethan wrote in his journal, "Today, Shadow saved my life. He's not just my dog. He's my hero and my best friend." The air in Pine Creek seemed different after the storm, a fresh, charged clarity, as if the town itself was renewed. News of Shadow's heroism traveled quickly. The local paper printed a story on the front page, complete with a photo of Shadow sitting at Ethan's feet, both of them still damp from the rescue. At the grocery store and the diner, neighbors congratulated Maggie and Ethan. Strangers on the street bent down to offer Shadow a treat or a scratch behind the ears. The Miller house was filled with more laughter than ever, and for a little while it felt as though nothing could break their fragile happiness. It was on a chilly Saturday morning, with mist curling up from the grass, that a sleek black pickup rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of the Miller home. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. He wore a pressed blue shirt tucked into faded jeans, his boots clean and expensive. His face was sharp and tanned, with deep-set eyes and a strong jaw. There was something about his bearing, a stiffness, a habit of scanning the street, as if cataloging everyone that spoke of discipline or perhaps an old habit of command. This was Mason Everett, and he carried with him an air of self-importance and a faint cologne that lingered after him. Maggie was in the front yard, tending her marigolds, when she saw him approach. Instinctively, she straightened, keeping her hands muddy. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. Mason smiled tightly, his gaze flicking from Maggie to the house, and then to Shadow, who lay dozing on the porch. "Name's Mason Everett," he said, voice deep and practiced. "I'm looking for a German Shepherd." "I believe you have him." At the sound of Mason's voice, Shadow's head snapped up, ears rigid. His body tensed, and a low, uncertain growl rumbled in his chest. Ethan, who had been sketching nearby, glanced up in alarm. Maggie stepped forward, putting herself between Mason and the dog. "He belongs to my son," she replied, her voice calm but steely. "We adopted him from the Pine Creek shelter." Mason's smile grew colder. He produced a battered leather folder from his pocket and opened it to reveal a faded photograph of a younger Shadow sitting beside a much younger Mason in military fatigues. "He's mine," Mason insisted. "He served with me overseas. There was a mix-up when he was decommissioned. I've spent months tracking him down." Maggie studied the photo, heart pounding. The resemblance was clear, Shadow only without the scars and gray hairs, but there was something unsettling in Mason's determination. Ethan looked between the adult's confusion and fear in his eyes. "Shadow's our family now," he whispered, his voice shaking. Mason crouched, attempting to call Shadow over with a sharp whistle. Shadow shrank back, tail tucked tight, refusing to move. Mason's jaw tightened. "He remembers me. He just needs time. I want to take him home." Maggie folded her arms, her nurse's instinct warning her of the danger beneath Mason's calm surface. "If you have paperwork, you'll need to show it to the shelter. We did everything by the book. I won't let you take him just because you show up with a picture." Mason's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. "I'll be back," he said, and strode off. Boots crunching in the gravel. That evening, Ethan was unusually quiet. At dinner, he picked at his food, worry clouding his face. "Mom, what if Mason comes back? What if he takes Shadow away?" Maggie reached for his hand, her own anxiety carefully hidden behind a gentle smile. "He's not taking anyone," she reassured him, though her mind spun with uncertainty. Later that night, Ethan slipped outside with Shadow curling up beside him on the porch and whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The next day, Will Parker visited as he often did, bringing a bag of treats for Shadow and fresh muffins from the bakery. Will was wearing his usual work clothes, sturdy khakis, plaid shirt, and his ever-present cap. When Maggie told him about Mason, Will's eyes hardened. He had spent years reading people, and there was something about Mason that set off every alarm bell in his head. "Let me do some checking," he murmured, patting Shadow's head, while Ethan and Shadow retreated to the backyard to play fetch. Will made a few quiet phone calls. He spoke with a friend at the local sheriff's office and a contact in the military K-9 community. Pieces of Mason's story didn't add up. His discharge was honorable, but there were rumors about his conduct, and a past investigation into mistreatment of service dogs had never quite reached the light of day. Will kept his suspicions to himself for now, wanting more evidence before alarming Maggie or Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan faced a new kind of worry at school. His classmates, having seen the article, asked him endless questions about Shadow's heroics, and now about the real owner who wanted him back. Some kids joked that the dog would be gone by next week, while others tried to reassure Ethan that the town would never let Shadow go. Ethan tried to act brave, but the fear of losing his best friend hung over every moment. That week, Mason returned this time with papers, vague documents filled with signatures and military jargon, but nothing that proved current ownership. Maggie stood her ground, insisting on speaking to the shelter and the town authorities. Shadow, sensing tension, grew increasingly protective, barking when Mason approached, refusing to leave Ethan's side. Will's investigation deepened. He visited the shelter, reviewed adoption records, and quietly interviewed a woman named Lila at the animal control office. Lila, short and spry, in her 50s, with a sharp wit and a fondness for gossip, confirmed that Mason had once handled Shadow, but was never listed as the legal owner after the dog's retirement. "If you ask me, there's more to this man than he lets on," she confided, pushing her glasses up her nose. One evening, Will shared his findings with Maggie over mugs of coffee at her kitchen table. "Something's off about him," he said. "I'll keep digging. For now, don't let Ethan or Shadow out of your sight when he's around." Maggie nodded, relief mixing with dread. As she looked at Ethan asleep, Shadow curled at his feet. She knew they would fight to keep their family together, no matter the cost. Pine Creek's golden leaves were just starting to fall, spinning gently through the crisp air as the Miller family's unease reached its peak. The town, once a haven of simple rhythms, now felt charged with uncertainty. A shadow seemed to linger over every day as Mason Everett's presence grew more insistent. Yet in the Miller home, a different kind of courage was taking root. Will Parker became a constant fixture around the house, always keeping a watchful eye. His face, broad and honest, now etched with new lines of worry, rarely broke into the warm, easy smiles Ethan remembered from the early days. Instead, Will moved with quiet intent, combing through old records in the shelter office, making calls in low, urgent tones, and seeking answers that others might have overlooked. The rumors he uncovered about Mason troubled him deeply. Complaints from other handlers, whispered stories about dogs hurt or left behind, and reports of harsh, punitive training methods that left scars deeper than the ones visible on fur. One chilly afternoon, as rain drummed on the windows, Maggie found herself at the kitchen table with Lila from Animal Control. Lila, short, brisk, her gray hair cropped close and her glasses perched low on her nose, spread out files and adoption records across the table, her lips pursed in determination. Mason always had a temper, Lila said, her voice tart. "It's why we never put his name on the final paperwork. After Shadow ran off, Mason just stopped asking." Maggie listened. Hands folded, her own heart pounding with a cocktail of anger and resolve. She realized she was no longer just protecting Ethan, she was standing up for the voiceless, for Shadow, for every animal that had suffered and gone unseen. Meanwhile, Ethan grew restless under the pressure. He watched his mother and Will whispering in the kitchen and wondered if the grown-ups would really be able to keep Shadow safe. One evening, as dusk fell and the world outside turned a misty blue, Ethan made a bold choice. With Shadow at his side, he went next door to Mrs. Ramsey's, where Sheriff Carson was enjoying a slice of apple pie after his evening rounds. Sheriff Carson was a man of few words, solidly built, always wearing his worn uniform with pride and a kind patience for children. Ethan, voice trembling but clear, asked, "Will you help us keep Shadow safe? Mason isn't who he says he is." The sheriff looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded, promising to take the matter seriously. The next day, Will received a call from an old contact in Denver, a woman named Sergeant Denise Hall. Denise was a stern woman in her 50s, with cropped black hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had once overseen the military working dog retirement process. Will explained the situation, and Denise remembered Mason well. He was rough with his dogs. A couple of handlers filed complaints, but nothing ever stuck. If Shadow ran from his care, I'm not surprised. With Denise's guidance, Will gathered statements and connected with former handlers willing to speak up. He worked closely with Sheriff Carson, who requested official records and witness statements. Meanwhile, Maggie's transformation became evident to everyone around her. No longer the quietly weary nurse she spoke out at the town hall meeting, a rare event in Pine Creek, her posture tall and unwavering. Her voice steady as she described Shadow's journey and the family's ordeal. Many neighbors, inspired by her bravery, offered support. Even Mrs. Ramsey, usually content with her garden gossip, stood up and shared how Shadow had saved Ethan, insisting the town should protect him from harm. As the evidence mounted, Mason's facade began to crack. He became more agitated with each visit, his smiles growing thin, his demands louder. One afternoon, he arrived at the Miller house unannounced, his face flushed with anger, fists clenched at his sides. "You people think you can steal what's mine," he barked, stepping too close to Maggie on the porch. Maggie, for the first time, did not retreat. She stood firm, her gaze unwavering. "Shadow was never yours," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "You lost that right when you hurt him. If you come here again, you'll have to answer to the law and to this community." Sheriff Carson arrived moments later, calm but commanding, with Will at his side. The sheriff presented Mason with a restraining order effective immediately, banning him from the Miller property. Mason blustered and threatened. But Will and the sheriff stood between him and the family. In front of half the neighborhood, Mason was forced to leave his protest, swallowed by the wind and the watchful eyes of Pine Creek. With Mason out of the picture, the mood in the Miller house lifted. That evening, Will, Maggie, Ethan, and Shadow gathered around the kitchen table for a celebratory dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and bread, but it felt like a feast. Ethan squeezed Shadow's neck, burying his face in the soft fur. "You're home, Shadow. You're safe." Maggie ruffled Ethan's hair, her own heart swelling with a mix of relief and pride. Later, as rain finally gave way to starlight, Maggie tucked Ethan in and sat quietly by his bedside. "Sometimes standing up for what's right is the hardest thing we can do," she whispered, "but it's how we protect those we love." Downstairs, Shadow dozed beside Will's boots, sighing in contentment at last. A gentle dawn crept over Pine Creek, the first rays of sun painting gold across the misty lawns and rooftops. Autumn had fully arrived, crisp, fragrant air, and a scattering of copper leaves beneath the ancient oak in the miller's yard. For the first time in months, there was an unmistakable sense of peace. The shadow that had lingered over the house, thickened by secrets and fear, had lifted, leaving a quiet clarity in its place. Shadow now moved with a newfound ease. His coat, thick and glossy again, gleamed when sunlight caught it. The once jagged scars across his flank were fading, and his gait, while still marked by a slight limp, was proud, almost joyful. Each morning he greeted Ethan at the bedroom door, tail wagging in anticipation, ears perked and eyes bright. At 10, Ethan had grown taller and more confident, the self-doubt and shyness that once clung to him now softening around the edges. His hair, always unruly, flopped over his brow, and he moved through his days with a companionable assurance, Shadow at his side. Maggie, too, felt the change. Though still slender and quick in her movements, she smiled more easily now, her laughter lighter. The lines at the corners of her eyes, etched from years of worry, now deepened. When she smiled, not when she frowned. At the clinic, her colleagues noticed her lighter step. Patients found her warmth even more genuine. She had started baking again on Sundays, the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and apples, laughter bubbling up between mother and son as Shadow hovered hopefully at their feet. At school, Ethan faced a new world. The story of Shadow's courage and Ethan's unwavering loyalty had spread, changing how his classmates saw him. There was still the occasional teasing, but most kids now waved to him in the hallway, some asking if they could walk Shadow after school or help teach him tricks. One girl, Abby Nguyen, stood out. Abby was 11, petite and energetic, with short black hair and bright brown eyes. The daughter of Pine Creek's librarian, she was known for her quick wit and love of animals. Abby approached Ethan one afternoon, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and asked if she could help train Shadow for the school's pet talent show. "You two are the bravest team I know," she said, flashing a crooked, encouraging grin. Encouraged by Abby's friendship, Ethan agreed, and soon their after-school hours were filled with games, practice sessions, and laughter in the backyard. Shadow responded eagerly, picking up new tricks and relishing every pat and word of praise. Through these afternoons, Ethan's confidence bloomed further, and for the first time he felt fully accepted, not just as the quiet kid, but as someone who belonged. Meanwhile, Will Parker began to put a long-held dream into action. Having watched how much Shadow's presence had transformed Ethan, he realized there must be other children in town in need of the same healing touch. Will was a sturdy, reliable figure, graying at the temples, weathered hands, and a ready smile despite the burdens he carried from his years in rescue. He placed notices around town and visited the community center recruiting help from other dog lovers. Before long, he launched a weekly Dog Buddies class at the park, a space for kids to learn about caring for dogs, training them with patience and kindness, and finding courage in small victories. On the first Saturday, a small, diverse group of children gathered under the old willow trees. There was Danny, a freckled boy of 8 with a shock of red hair and a habit of biting his nails when nervous. Samira, a tall and quiet girl from a recently arrived family who smiled shyly at the dogs but barely spoke above a whisper. And twins Lucas and Lily, who shared everything from their battered sneakers to their secret jokes. Will taught them to read canine body language, to approach with gentleness, and to celebrate even the smallest breakthroughs, a wagging tail, a trusting nuzzle. Shadow was the star of the class, demonstrating calm patience and playful enthusiasm. The children watched in awe as Ethan guided Shadow through obstacles, offering treats and kind words. The experience wasn't just about the dogs, it became a space for the children themselves to heal, to find friends and confidence they'd never known before. For Ethan, helping others transformed his own scars into strengths. Back at home, Maggie often found herself reflecting on the changes the past months had wrought. Alone in the kitchen at night, she'd look at the photo of her late husband on the mantel and whisper, "We're doing okay. We're finally okay." The loneliness that had haunted her since his passing was easing. Instead of emptiness, there was now gratitude, hope, and the laughter of a boy and his dog drifting through the house. One Sunday, the Miller house overflowed with warmth. Abby and her mother brought homemade pho, and Will arrived with a loaf of fresh sourdough. The children, Ethan, Abby, the twins, and Samira, chased each other through the yard, Shadow barking and spinning in the golden light. Maggie watched from the porch, her heart full. For the first time in years, their home felt complete. As dusk fell and the guests drifted home, Ethan sat on the porch steps. Shadow curled beside him, head resting on the boy's knee. "We made it," Buddy Ethan whispered, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "We're really home." Inside, Maggie closed her journal and looked out at the pair. Love, she realized, had mended wounds she never thought would heal, not just Shadow's but hers and Ethan's as well. And in that moment, with laughter fading into the evening and hope rising with the moon, the Miller family's journey felt at last like it was only just beginning. The first signs of autumn painted Pine Creek in a blaze of color, the old oaks and maples ablaze with scarlet and gold. The air buzzed with excitement as the townspeople prepared for the annual Pine Creek Fall Festival, a cherished tradition that turned the town square into a patchwork of food stalls, games, laughter, and music drifting on the wind. This year, however, there was a new energy, hopeful, celebratory, and centered around a certain German shepherd who had quietly transformed the entire community. On the morning of the festival, Maggie bustled through the kitchen, her hair pinned up, cheeks flushed with anticipation. She wore a sunflower yellow dress she hadn't put on in years, her lean frame swaying with renewed confidence. She moved gracefully as she packed boxes of homemade apple pies for the bake sale, every movement full of purpose and joy. Ethan, now a little taller, stood at her side, checking the supplies list one last time, his eyes bright with excitement. He wore his favorite green sweater hair carefully combed by Maggie, and a smile that refused to leave his face. Shadow, ever the guardian, sat near the door, his coat shining and tail sweeping the floor. A blue ribbon emblazoned Pine Creek Hero was tied around his sturdy neck. His eyes, now calm and gentle, followed the family's every move. There was a quiet pride about him, a sense that he understood the role he played, not just as a pet, but as a symbol for all who had struggled and healed. Will Parker arrived early wearing his old Pine Creek rescue vest and a battered felt hat. He brought with him a carload of dog supplies and handmade signs for the adoption and fundraiser booths. He was joined by Abby Nguyen and her mother Mrs. Lin, who set up a table of books and crafts for the children. Abby, with her lively grin and boundless energy, helped Ethan hang banners that read, "Help us help more heroes like Shadow." The square filled quickly with familiar faces. Mrs. Ramsey Cheeks, rosy as ever, carried baskets of cookies. Danny, Samira, and the twins waved from the petting zoo. Sheriff Carson, in his dress uniform, shook hands and greeted everyone with quiet authority. By midday, the festival was in full swing. Children shrieked with delight as they bobbed for apples. Neighbors shared homemade chili and cider, and live bluegrass music filled the air. At the center of it all stood Shadow, patiently accepting pets and hugs, his steady presence comforting even the shyest child. He posed for photos with townsfolk and, with Ethan by his side, helped guide younger children through the Dog Buddies demonstration course that Will had set up under the willows. The highlight of the afternoon was the Community Awards ceremony. The mayor, a petite woman in her 60s with silver hair and a ready smile, took the stage dressed in a crisp blazer and autumn scarf. Her voice, rich and warm, carried through the crowd as she spoke. This year, Pine Creek has seen extraordinary courage and compassion. It's my honor to present our Youth Courage Award to Ethan Miller for his bravery, kindness, and the love he's shown not just to Shadow, but to our entire community. The crowd erupted in applause as Ethan blushed deeply, stepping forward with Shadow at his side to accept the framed certificate. The mayor winked, then bent to pin a medal to Shadow's blue ribbon. And to Shadow, who reminds us all that hope can begin again, no matter the scars we carry. Tears glistened in Maggie's eyes as she watched her son and the dog who had changed everything. Will stood beside her quietly, proud, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment, the pain of the past faded, replaced by gratitude and joy. As the day went on, Maggie, Ethan, and Will led the fundraising event for Pine Creek's new animal rescue initiative. Children and adults crowded around their booth, dropping coins and bills into brightly decorated jars, sharing stories of their own beloved pets. Maggie spoke with warmth and conviction, telling how Shadow had helped heal her family and why every animal deserved a second chance. Will, with his patient manner, explained training techniques to new adopters, while Ethan and Abby handed out homemade treats and thank you notes. By sunset, the festival's lanterns glowed against the deepening blue sky, laughter echoing into the night. Shadow curled at Ethan's feet as the boy read him a thank you letter he'd written for the whole town. The Miller home, once marked by loneliness, was now full of new friends, shared meals, and a sense of belonging that felt permanent. When the festival ended and the family returned home, Maggie lingered on the porch, taking in the quiet. She looked at Ethan and Shadow, inseparable, both changed for the better. Will joined her mug of cider in hand. They sat in silence, the kind that needed no words, while the cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves. That night, Ethan wrote the final entry in his journal. Shadow is more than a dog. He's our hero, our family, and a friend to the whole town. Maybe hope isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you help build every single day. And so the story of Shadow, the German Shepherd who found his way home, became more than legend in Pine Creek. It became a promise that with kindness, patience, and love, even the deepest wounds could heal, and every ending could be a new beginning. Shadow's journey is a gentle reminder that God often works through our hearts, guiding us to heal, to reach out, and to bring hope where it's needed most. In life, you never know when your smallest kindness might become someone's greatest blessing. If this story touched your heart, please share it with friends. Leave your thoughts in the comments. and subscribe for more stories of hope and faith. May God watch over you and your loved ones, filling your days with quiet miracles. If you believe in the power of kindness and in God's gentle hand, guiding us all, comment Amen below to send a blessing to others.